In December 1974, 3 years after the last official lunar mission, and with no public announcement of any kind, 3 astronauts are quietly informed that Apollo 18 is back on. Commander Nathan Walker, Lieutenant Colonel John Gray, and Captain Benjamin Anderson receive their briefing in private. No press, no ceremony, just a classified set of orders from the Department of Defense, handed down with the calm confidence of people who have already decided how this ends. Gray will remain in orbit aboard the Freedom Command module. Walker and Anderson will descend to the surface in the Liberty lander. The mission, they are told, is a practical one. Plant a series of detection devices across designated coordinates to monitor Soviet missile activity. A Cold War errand dressed in a spacesuit. Routine, contained, and above all, secret. The launch goes without incident. Gray settles into orbit, while Walker and Anderson make their descent through the silence of the lunar approach and touch down cleanly on the surface. For a few hours, everything feels exactly like what they were told it would be. They suit up, run their checks, and step out onto the gray expanse. The surface stretches in every direction without a single reference point, flat and pale and indifferent. They plant the detectors at the designated coordinates, collect rock samples as instructed, and document the work methodically on camera. By the time they return to the Liberty and seal themselves in for the night, the mission is on schedule, and both men are tired in the way that follows relief. Then, lying in the cabin in the near total quiet, they hear something outside. Neither man moves at first. Anderson pulls up the external camera feed and scans the surface around the lander. Everything looks as it should, except for one detail. A small rock that had been sitting near the landing struts an hour ago has shifted position. Not far, just enough. Anderson watches it for a long moment, then closes the feed and says nothing to Walker. The next morning changes everything. Walking the perimeter of their site, they find footprints in the lunar dust that belong to neither of them. The prints are deliberate, evenly spaced, and lead away from the lander toward the far edge of a shallow crater. Walker and Anderson follow them without speaking, and find a Soviet lander sitting motionless in the basin below, a craft that was never mentioned in any briefing, never disclosed, never acknowledged. They approach carefully. Inside, they find a dead cosmonaut. The body has been there long enough that the condition of it makes the cause of death difficult to determine. What they can determine is that whatever happened, it was not peaceful. Walker radios Mission Control with the discovery, and both men wait in silence for a response. Mission Control tells them to continue with their assigned tasks and not deviate from the plan. That night, Walker goes out alone to inspect one of the detectors and returns to the lander screaming. Something is moving inside his suit. He tears at it before Anderson can help him out of it. They lay the suit open on the floor and find a small rock pressed against the interior lining and a wound in Walker's chest that neither the rock nor any tool on board could cleanly account for. Anderson holds the rock under the light and studies it for a long time. He cannot articulate what he is seeing, only that something about it is wrong. Walker is in pain and takes a sedative to sleep. By the following morning, he is confused, then agitated, then convinced with quiet and unwavering certainty that the mission was never meant to bring them home. Anderson contacts Gray and asks him to prepare for an unscheduled extraction. Mission Control cuts into the channel almost immediately and issues Gray a direct order to hold position and maintain orbital procedure, warning that any deviation will compromise the return window and strand all 3 of them permanently. Gray stays on the line and says very little. He keeps listening. Left alone with the footage and the growing stillness of the lander, Anderson sits down and reviews everything they have recorded since landing. He watches it slowly and carefully, going back over moments he had moved past too quickly. Walker's condition collapses quickly after that. He becomes unreachable by the evening, lost somewhere between the infection and his own fear, and sometime in the night he leaves the lander without a word and walks out onto the surface. Anderson watches the external cameras until Walker disappears beyond the frame. Alone now and with no remaining options, Anderson runs his pre-launch sequence and lifts the Liberty off the surface. His only destination is Gray. Mission Control issues its final instruction, ordering Gray to move the Freedom to a safe orbital distance and make no attempt at contact. Gray ignores the order. He keeps the Freedom in position and talks Anderson in through the ascent, steady and calm, as though the situation is manageable. Inside the Liberty, the reduced gravity begins to lift the loose rocks from the sample containers. They drift upward slowly. They turn. Anderson feels the controls go wrong beneath his hands, just as Gray is guiding him through the final approach. The Liberty hits the Freedom at a speed that neither module is built to survive. The transmission ends mid-sentence. The footage cuts to black. An epilogue, delivered without drama, notes that Commander Nathan Walker, Lieutenant Colonel John Gray, and Captain Benjamin Anderson were each officially reported to have died in separate and unrelated accidents. Walker lost at sea, Gray in a training incident, Anderson in circumstances that left no recoverable remains. The Department of Defense has never acknowledged that the mission took place. NASA has maintained that Apollo 17 in December 1972 was the final lunar mission. Several storage facilities that housed rock samples returned from earlier Apollo missions have since reported those samples missing, with no explanation on record. The moon has not been visited since. No official reason has ever been given.